Hi all. Sorry for the confusion about our live session, but this just gives us an alternative and an opportunity to use some technology and something for you to consider perhaps implementing in your own pedagogy. So let's go ahead and jump in. First, where are you right now as far as where you're at in the course? What picture best describes you? Would it be you're running a little low on steam as we get close to the end of the course? Are you still in great shape and high energy? If you want to include that in your comment in the Padlet, that would be great. So something else that you can share in the Padlet. And as you go through this recording, there will be obviously be mostly content that you'll want to consider and reflect on. There'll be things specifically like what picture describes you and this. What's the biggest challenge in implementing active learning online? Where you may want to engage by comment or video on the Padlet to continue the conversation. So, what is the biggest challenge in implementing active learning online? There could be many. One of them is just the time factor, right? And all that's required to get it going, if you will. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Something to think about is when you're looking at active learning and the integration of technology to facilitate that is to be strategic. Think about your why. Why do you want to elicit active learning into your course? Is it for the outcome to expedite that? Is it best way that you know how to do this particular activity, or is it just something to do? And it's always good to interrogate the why behind what aspect of active learning that you're looking to facilitate. So let's talk about where theory intersects with practice. As you've looked at the content in the course, you can see that there's a lot of a theoretical basis behind active learning. So you want to kind of find that balancing act between what it is that you're trying to do and the theory that provides scaffolding or support for it. Now, this is familiar, right? Letting the outcome determine the assessment strategy. Remember, this was back, I think, in our first or second, I think our second live session, that strategically everything comes from where we're trying to end up at and then working backwards from that. So let's talk a little bit again about the technology tax or the group work tax, right? It's that extra work that a student has to do when we're asking them to do something in the online space. So if we were in class and said, hey, let's everybody pull your chairs in a circle, here's a question or two. I want you guys to do something pair share, and we'll circle back here in 5 or 10 minutes and see what you think. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? There's not a lot of work that goes into that, sans shuffling a few chairs. But here, we might be asking them to use a particular technology, Teams, Zoom, or some other um, technology that they may not be familiar with, even though we're very familiar with, or we might assume that a lot of students are familiar with that. Perhaps it's even the legacy video conferencing tool that our university uses, but they never have. So there's a consideration here of what it is that we're asking them to do. And I always say no taxation without compensation in the online space. In other words, if we're asking them to contribute more to the environment, let's reward that. Doesn't necessarily have to be in points, certainly not in fiscally, but what is it that we're going to communicate that lets them know we realize this is work, labor, and part of that is going to be in it, going to be recognized that effort in the course somehow. And as we're thinking about this active learning, one of the things that we think about when we're thinking about our why, we're thinking about how to connect theory to practice, how to ensure that the outcome is being met and augmented by the use of our active learning strategy. We're considering the tax. And now what particular aspect of a theoretical basis, like here, like the community of inquiry plus one model, plus one is something I've added on to it, and I'm sure others have done that as well. But what particular aspect of the model, or is it all, that we're trying to connect to in this active learning strategy? What will it lean towards? And that's always something to consider. And then we might want to consider a framework for technology integration. And we can back up here. And as we look to, we have our learning management system, the device that they may be using to access it, and then various levels of connection, there's always a challenge to adopt a tool because it's the shiny new tool out there, right? Everybody's talking about it. We've been to a conference and they've had a session about it, or we used it and it was really cool and we want to integrate it. That's pretty natural, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we kind of take it through our filters. Now, here's some theoretical frameworks for technology integration for you to consider. It's probably familiar to you, but we'll kind of run through these if not. The SAMR model. Is it substituting, augmenting, modifying, or redefining it? Now, this is something that's very approachable and something to think about when we look at technology. And I don't necessarily, when I implement a new technology, pull this out, look at it and see where it exactly fits. But it's good to have familiarity with to kind of ensure that I know exactly how the technology is functioning here. Uh, a framework, the Triple E framework, is another way to look at technology integration. This is very popular in the K through 12 realm. It's in a textbook I use in my graduate digital curriculum integration course. And it asks questions about, does it extend the learning, enhance the learning, or engage the learning? And it has some instructional strategies over here that you can look at, and then some questions that you can ask and interrogate the particular technology. Another model is TPACK, which is you can see and read for yourself here um, what the acronym stands for. But this is kind of one of those models that goes well in a textbook. I think I've included this in a chapter I wrote in a textbook on this. But frankly, once you have a lot of circles and lines and everything is connected, that can get a little overwhelming for me. So I find myself leaning towards the SAMR model, AAA framework, or after you've been kicking around for a while and using this, you just kind of know where it kind of fits. And something to think about when selecting technology, and you can see where I credit this from is, and again, this can be a little overwhelming, but it's certainly worth from a development or design standpoint to having something like this nearby to consider as you're building and integrating the technology into your particular course or assignment. So let's take a pause and look at the second part of our unit, and that is the augmented reality or virtual reality. And I say take a pause, and here's why. As we're thinking about technology integration in general, we kind of want to be strategic about how we're doing that. We want to know the why behind it. We want to know the pathway, and we want to know the theoretical basis so that we can balance theory and practice. And then we think about pedagogical practices in the online space, and then something like AI comes along, Chat GPT. We hear something about virtual reality, and we know there's headsets and augmented reality where applications are laid over something that currently exists, and it can almost feel a little overwhelming. And we can take something like augmented reality or virtual reality and think, well, that's just off the table for me. There's no way. Let's take a look at some of this and let's interrogate it and see how this possibly could become part of the pedagogy. I think it may be more approachable than we think. First, do you remember Google Glass? We experimented with it here at um, my university, probably 10 or 12 years ago when it came out. I remember being in an airport, and let me back up. It was not very functional. It was a technology that you had to really want to try to incorporate. And when I saw it out in public, like I did at an airport one time, when somebody had it on, I thought, you're really trying hard to make this work. And it really doesn't. And you don't hear about Google Glass anymore, but that's fine. It was a start of something, right? So when you think about where does virtual reality and augmented reality, where may it start in your pedagogy? Hopefully very small and simply. So let's take a look. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was on campus and it was on probably a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. It was an off time. I remember that. And I saw a car circling and I knew it wasn't somebody who went to the university. And I just thought this is kind of odd and kind of you know, my sensibilities were peaked and I thought, I'm going to go ahead and call security. So I called security and I said, there's kind of a car driving around and you can see where this is going. It was um, somebody playing the virtual reality game. And the security stopped them and they followed up with me. And now we were happened to be a campus hotspot for this. And so again, it's something that started out and had varying levels of success, but it never stopped and didn't quit. It just kind of keeps going, right? Well, this would be an example of, as was the Pokemon Go, what they would call augmented reality. It's taking a reality that already exists, right, and just augmenting it or adding to it. Now, this is rather helpful if I'm in one of the big box stores and I'm looking for something, and it can be a real challenge at times to find somebody who isn't, talking to someone in the paint aisle, and you just need to find a particular brush or something, and you can just go on the app and find it by yourself, just like this, as opposed to waiting around for, the conversation to end. So something like this is very productive. But how does all this fit into online education? Well, something like this can serve to extend the online classroom environment, if you will. So I like to think of the online environment as a stage, if you will, or a staging for learning, not the only place that learning can take place. So if someone has an app and you decide to include something in your course, well, everyone can participate, but they'll be participating in the learning outside of the course and then bringing the learning back to the course. Right? Or you've learned how to shop at Home Depot in a really smart way, perhaps. So where is all this going? And I think that's a fair question. How does augmented reality and virtual reality find its place in online learning? Well, it's been around for a long time, and it really hasn't found a place yet. It's on the periphery, and it's been there for a long time. So I don't think there's any danger of it all of a sudden taking over online learning, and we're find ourselves way behind the curve. But there are strategic ways to implement it, and let me tell you about how we have done it here at our university. And if it's something that you want to do, I think it's very manageable. So we have a innovation foundry upstairs in our library, and we enhance courses with virtual reality. And let me tell you one way that we have done it, and it's connected to some research I have done in the past. So there is a particular, I'm going to jump ahead a slide here or two in just a moment. So in our biblical studies courses, there is a particular aspect where in one of the courses, I think it's like Bible 102, there's a unit in the Old Testament and they look at Herod's temple. Well, we decided to, because there is a Herod's temple virtual reality curriculum out there, to take a look. And we have some of the headsets here, right? So as we look at virtual reality, there's two ways, in augmented reality, there's two ways to do it. So the virtual reality would be to visit Herod's temple virtually. You're not visiting the actual temple and then looking at your phone or other device to see stuff that's been added onto it. You're in an actual virtual reality. So you can put your headset on or you can access it through a computer. So it would look something like this if you're looking at it through the computer lens, if you will. So then you're kind of visiting a virtual temple and you can kind of navigate with your mouse and look at it that way. That's one way to experience it. And it takes it into a three-dimensional realm and it becomes a lot more exciting than if you're just looking at picture on a page or watching a video. Another way to look at it is with the headsets, which is what you saw in that previous photo where you've got the Oculus 2 headset on and then you are immersed in the temple. So that's one way to do it. Now here, so what we did at ACU is we had students sign up at the beginning of the course to look at it in one of two ways. And we basically asked, would you like to go into the virtual reality group or would you like to just go into the regular group? And they usually self-select about 50-50 and it worked out numbers wise pretty closely. So when it came to that particular unit, they could have it taught either by our professor in a classroom or the other virtual reality control group came over to our Innovation Foundry and put on a headset and they walked through it in virtual reality. Then there was the testing. And what we found is that the students who used the headset and the students who were in the regular classroom had virtually no difference as far as the multiple choice questions went, recalling certain things, how high was the temple, things like that. But when it came to the short answer or essay questions, the students in virtual reality control group significantly outperformed the other students. Now, back about 12 or 13 years ago, I did research with students reading on a iPad versus paper. And the results were somewhat surprising. And they followed along these same lines. And I could give those to you, but that's not the point of this. But it follows along legacy learning, virtual reality, and other things. So that being the case, I went and put on the headsets, went through Herod's Temple, and I had this. I have a terminal degree from the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Very familiar with Herod's Temple. I put this on, and in 10 minutes, I felt like I had learned more about Herod's Temple than I did in my seminary experience. One thing of note is I got very motion sick and actually had to lay down for about an hour and a half afterwards. So there is that. It does come with a disclaimer, but there is one particular part here where, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, where it has something that you can climb up. There is an actual place that you can climb up on the in the temple, and I was doing that in virtual reality, and I realized that I'm a little bit afraid of heights. I've known that, but I didn't realize it could come to fruition and come back to haunt me, so to speak, in virtual reality. But it was very impactful, very effective. So one entree may be an app that the students can go to. Now, it's not virtual reality here in the classic sense of a headset, but it's one other way that a student can access something in VR, or perhaps your university that you're at has a headset or has virtual reality where students could go, or where there's a local headset or someone can opt in if they so choose. But there's other ways to do it, and that's one approach you can take to augmented or virtual reality. And I always say when approaching augmented or virtual reality, take these, right? Take the baby steps and keep your why up there in the corner, always in the back of your mind about why you're doing this. Is this going to be something that accelerates the learning, or is it just something novel? And sometimes there's a place for novelty, right? All right. Well, thank you. And again, I apologize for the confusion with our live session today. And I would love to hear your reaction to our first couple of questions of what best describes you right now. Where are you at professionally with your online teaching, and then perhaps with the course itself? Where are you there as well? And then what do you see as the biggest challenge in implementing active learning online? And if you can put that either type that into the Padlet here or record a short video and embed it as well. Thank you.